Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Webster with SAG-AFTRA Foundation, and thank you so much for tuning in to watch another one of our Conversations at Home videos. I want to continue reminding everyone watching these videos that the SAG-AFTRA Foundation is continuing to raise funds for our COVID-19 Emergency Assistance Fund, and this fund is in place to support actors who are out of work with all of the film and television productions being closed right now. We're working to support actors in terms of paying their bills, making mortgage, buying groceries, paying utility bills, whatever it is that they need to financially get by at the moment. So please check out the details below this video and consider supporting if you're able to in any way. And today it is my absolute pleasure to be joined by the wonderful Gugu Mbatha-Raw, who is in the morning show. And I have to say, like, your character resonated, I think, so strongly with so many women, particularly as the show did as a whole. And so thank you for being part of this amazing piece of storytelling. And I know that when you first took on the role that you only had the first couple of scripts, but you were able to get on the phone with Mimi Leader and Carrie Aaron, who were the writers and director and showrunner team, and that they really gave you that whole journey of what Hannah was going to be, because obviously the first two episodes, it's not very clear. And I wanted to ask you about how useful that was for you as a tool, as you then kind of sat there with even just those first two scripts and mapped out how you wanted to play this character.
Yeah, I mean, it was very useful to know where we were going with Hannah and really the whole show, and to have Kerry and Mimi as our showrunner and director. You know, they had already started mapping out the whole show, but the scripts weren't individually written yet. So, but I think from the outset, reading even just the first script, the tone and the style of the show was very, very clear. You know, the dialogue's quite fast paced. There's that New York adrenalized energy of live TV behind the scenes. You know, I knew that it was the quality of the writing was really top notch. So that was great. And then it was, you know, again, just knowing that Hannah's storyline was going to be quite topical and quite powerful, and I was just really drawn to it because I just thought I hadn't seen a TV series really take on the themes of sexual assault and, you know, power, gender dynamics in the workplace and sexual predators in the workplace like that quite so directly. But I also love the fact that they wanted to do it in a really nuanced way.
Yeah, and I love the way that you were so immediately drawn to the writing. And there was something that you've mentioned previously, that when you read a script where the writing's really good, that you tend to start reading it out loud to yourself the very first time that you're reading it, which I think is wonderful. Yeah. But I was interested in that because I think that there's a value in, you know, obviously at any point in the process, there's a value to reading a script out loud and just hearing the character's voice in. And so I was interested in the way that actually from the offset, when you're reading the script for the very first time and you don't really even know who the character is yet, how that actually helps with your discovery process in understanding them and starting to see those different layers very early on.
Yeah, I mean, I remember distinctly doing that with San Junipero, the Black Mirror episode that I read. You know, I was sort of 5 pages in and I was already speaking my lines out loud on a bus somewhere in London. But, you know, it's funny. I think for me, it's also, you know, coming from a theatre background, coming from having studied Shakespeare, you know, and, you know, I'm very attuned to the rhythm of dialogue. Good dialogue, I think, really supports you as an actor. And you know, obviously on screen, it's not all about the words. Often it's what's between the words, you know, in any acting. But I think, you know, with something like this, there was a pace to it and there was just a muscular energy to it that really, as I say, it just kind of, if you're an actor that loves words, you kind of jump in and you sort of plug into those rhythms and that takes you on that emotional journey.
Yeah, I was also interested and curious about what your research process was and what kind of areas you wanted to dive into, because I know that when you were doing A Wrinkle in Time, you did things like go to the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. Brooklyn, you really immersed yourself in the space of Harlem and jazz music and that era. And so I was interested in kind of what areas you chose to explore and in terms of your research process for this particular role.
Yeah, well, truth be told, just because of schedules, I didn't have the luxury of that much time to do that sort of research with the morning show initially, because I was also just starting filming Misbehaviour in London, which is a totally different thing, you know, set in 1970, where I played the first woman of colour to win Miss World. So I was in a very different headspace, but I was able to read the fascinating book Top of the Morning, which is, you know, the cutthroat world world of morning TV, which inspired the show. And, you know, I've actually been on some morning shows as a guest, as an actor. So I had experiences to draw upon in terms of meeting the bookers. You know, my character is the talent booker, if you like. And myself, you know, having been on shows, I've met those people with those roles. So I had that to draw upon. And of course, you know, the themes of sexual assault of, you know, post-Me Too era that we're in, obviously those conversations have been reverberating in the zeitgeist, you know, for the last few years. So I was obviously very conscious of that. And I, you know, I talked to a few friends about some of their experiences, you know, friends who have been in a similar position to Hannah. So that was useful, but I was also wanting to be sensitive to, you know, I wasn't really allowed to divulge where the story was going. So it was tricky to do that kind of research in a sensitive way without also giving away, you know, broadly the storyline. So yeah, and then I felt very supported by the research and the team that, you know, Kerry, Erin and Mimi Leader had assembled, you know, an amazing writing team. We had great consultants on set in terms of the world of morning TV all the time. So yeah, and it was a great ensemble vibe. So you could really feel supported, you know, with the rest of the actors.
Yeah, and I know that you've also been part of the organization Time's Up, both in the UK and both in the States since its inception, and was kind of being part of that organization and just seeing the way this is so prevalent across so many industries a really valuable asset as well. And did it kind of inform the way that you thought about this character at all?
Yeah, I think what's been interesting over the last few years is, you know, especially in terms of Time's Up, in terms of the women's movement, if you will, at this time is, it's been such a journey, I think, and I've really noticed, you know, first of all, we're exposing these, you know, situations, we're unearthing them, and then we're talking about them, then we're protesting about them. Then there's another level where the work itself is, it comes through the material that you're getting, and I think that was what was fascinating come 2018, you know, when I was reading scripts for The Morning Show or Misbehavior, which also deals with the women's liberation movement in a historic sense, that, you know, you're actually able to find, you know, the activism through the art, which is another layer of, you know, because of the conversations it's generating, because of the themes. And obviously it's an entertaining show. I mean, you know, amazing ensemble of actors, and you know, it's not documentary, but I love the fact that you can kind of blur the lines a little bit when you're able to work on something that is topical, that does, you know, have issues beneath the surface, but hopefully, you know, as I say, it's done in a layered way.
Yeah, one of the other aspects that I love in terms of not just your character, but all of the female characters on this is the representation of women who are unapologetically ambitious, because that feels like another thing that, you know, we've finally been able to have a voice to that within storytelling. And it doesn't just have to be like, this woman's great, this woman's a terrible woman. It's like everyone is a complex person. And I was interested for you in the importance in getting to be part of just representing that genuine complexity that exists every day in life already.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so refreshing. I think, you know, so often as an actor, you know, there's two types of women in the show, right? There's the sweet ingenue, or there's the, you know, the bitchy character, or whatever, and you don't really get to deviate much between those two. And I think, you know, hopefully that's changing, and I'm always looking, it is changing. I mean, you know, but on a show like this, and I think especially I have to give credit to Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon as executive producers, you know, such powerhouse women in our industry that, you know, from the top down, the producers, the writing team really wanted to bring out all those nuanced characters and incredible actors on our show. You know, Karen Pittman, Belle Powley, you know, just such a breadth of womankind. And I think it's great because you're able to see the nuances, you're able to see, particularly with our storylines, all the different perspectives of a world like The Morning Show, and everybody's different relationships to Steve Carell's character Mitch. And it's hard to be judgmental because, like you say, they're all ambitious. Someone like Hannah, you know, actually is in a very conflicting situation in some ways. When she takes that promotion, it's, and I think many women have been in that situation where somebody has so much more power than them, and you understand, but she's completely torn, really, and in some ways it's like a morality tale, of her sort of selling her soul in a sense, and it comes back to catch up with her. But I loved the fact that there was that kind of dynamic, but also Karen Pittman's character, who actually felt like she had a real relationship affair with him. There's another sort of consensual relationship with Belle Powley and Nesta Carbonell's character. So everybody has, a different side to it. And that's just like life. So I really appreciated that they weren't afraid to go for the complexities.
Yeah, and because you were mentioning the moment where she does accept the job promotion in the office, and it feels like in watching it that it's very much just an acceptance that she understands, she sees in that moment that nothing's going to change and nothing is going to be done. And it so successfully shows the number of voices that come together and kind of conspire either proactively or just through their silence in order for perpetrators to continue in industries and spaces like we see in the show. And I was curious about the way that you all thought about the way that you really wanted to show just the number of people that were involved in the silencing of a character like Mitch in the show.
Yeah, and I think that was the great thing about doing a flashback episode for us and for the show. Episode 8, which really is when we get to see Hannah, in a bit more breadth, is a flashback episode a few years previously, and really, for me, it was about the culture of the workplace, not just one person. And I think that's really interesting that we get to see Mitch and in his kingdom, if you like, in a place where, and a world where everybody is culpable, really, for maintaining that culture. And that I thought was really, really fascinating to see as well, because I think so often it's he said, she said, it's very easy to sort of say, well, why didn't this person come out with this before? Why has it taken them so long to express this? And actually, if the culture surrounding you is really not supporting that open dialogue, or you don't feel safe or you don't feel like your livelihood, your job is safe, it's very, very conflicting. And I think, it helps really give more compassion to people's individual choices when they understand that the culture really wasn't on their side.
Yeah, and then even beyond that, there's the situation that we see her in later where Maggie Haberman wants her to be part of the article. Bradley wants her to go on air and talk about it, and she's grappling with that side of things. And I was interested if you looked at all at kind of the journey that women had taken who had spoken out, because there's a huge weight behind that decision, and obviously everyone needs to make their own decision at the end of the day. But I was curious kind of like if you looked to the journey that other women had been on who had spoken out as an influence for kind of understanding the journey of that decision process for Hannah.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, we were always talking about it. And as we were shooting the series, that there were many different incidents almost every other week in the media that we could, draw upon. I mean, obviously this was not based on any one particular case, but I think, you can certainly see patterns in terms of, how people's trauma gets buried, and certainly, what by the time we got to episode 10, really, for me, seeing the scene that my character has with Reese's character, Bradley, where she's, drawing her on to explain the situation. It's really the first time that Hannah has relived those moments. And I definitely got a sense from many cases that I heard about that, people do push down these experiences. They try to move on. They don't want to be a victim. They want to be a survivor, and they want it not to define them. And I think that was very clear in the writing of that particular scene, and Hannah is unraveling in a sense, because it has just been glossed over, pushed on, but it moved on, but she hasn't actually dealt with it inside.
Yeah. What was the way in which you set about preparing for that scene? Because I heard that you directed that whole thing in one take, which is astounding. And, you know, that it's about a 7-page monologue, which is no small feat at the best of times, but just the amount of layers and different emotions that you had to pull into that. I imagine it was hugely challenging. So how did you set about just navigating the preparation process before you even stepped onto set and were filming it?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that was somewhat the climax of Hannah's arc, and I was excited for the challenge. And when I read the script, I'd been waiting in a sense. I knew that it was coming, but I was not disappointed. I mean, Kerry did such a phenomenal job, really arcing that scene and that thought process and that emotional process for Hannah. And it was 7-8 pages of dialogue. It felt almost like theatre, in terms of long takes and being able to just obviously do the basic actor work of making sure you're very secure on the words, but also that those words, like I was saying about the rhythm of the dialogue before, they really did take me on a journey. And in a sense, I just needed to sort of get out the way, I think in terms of not imposing too much on that, because there was it was such just a strong emotional revelation for her. And then on set on the day, obviously Reese was incredibly supportive, and Mimi Leader, who directed that episode, they gave me a lot of space to be able to keep the camera rolling. The crew were very supportive, and I think it was also my last day on the whole show, so I had a sense of being able to really go for it and not not leave anything not leave anything behind, I suppose.
Yeah, there's also a really powerful moment within that monologue where she acknowledges that it is something that she thinks about constantly and every day, and the fact that it is an incident that defines her to herself as well. And I was interested in the way and in the small nuanced moments that you thought about interspersing that into your performance, particularly in the earlier episodes before we even necessarily know that that's part of her journey. And if there were kind of any ways that you pulled it into those performances and those scenes earlier on.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I was always looking out for those breadcrumbs, because I think as an actor, when you're going, and it's the greatest thing, I think, for an actor to have a character that has a secret. I think that's always gives you something to play, because even if you don't have words to say, you have feelings to feel and thoughts that you are concealing, and so that was always fascinating. Early on in episode 2, I had a scene with Ashley Brown, who is one of Mitch's other victims, who actually I'm trying to convince to go on the show. And we definitely talked about how Hannah's own motivations were very personal, for being so sort of almost manipulative, and ambitious. And you could read it two ways. You could read, wow, this woman's really good at her job. She's really slick. She's really a good, journalist in a sense, the way that she's drawing this woman onto her side. But then also, there's a hint of desperation. There's a hint of all these other little colors, which were fun to put in, during the show. Again, later on, when Hannah is actually sort of dobs in Claire to HR, and you think, well, that wasn't something a friend would do. But when you actually understand her experience and her motivations, you can see that she was possibly trying to protect her friend and projecting, her own experience with Mitch onto Claire, which actually wasn't the case with Yanko, Nesta's character. But that's what we do. We often sort of project our own experiences onto other people, because that's how we understand the world. So yeah, it was really kind of fun to have all of those moments and know really her history, and make choices as to how much or little to reveal.
Yeah, I love the relationship between Hannah and Belle Powley's character, who you were mentioning just now, and the dynamic between the two of them. And it really feels like her character allows you to show lots of different sides of Hannah, because they do have that existence outside of work. So even when they're interacting in the workplace, it allows you to pull in other aspects of her personality. So I was curious in the way that kind of Belle Powley, the way that she played that character and the way that the two of you interacted dynamic-wise really helped you to flesh out the character of Hannah as well.
Yeah, well, I actually already knew Bells before we did this job. So, you know, the two Brits on the show, surprise, surprise, people think all Brits know each other, but we actually did. We've got lots of mutual friends and, you know, have hung out a lot socially. So that was nice because it felt like we already had a shorthand, even though we hadn't worked together. We had a shorthand culturally, and that was really lovely. And also, you know, that big sister dynamic is always fun to play. And I think, like you say, you know, I think Hannah is, you know, a very driven career woman, but she also can see, you know, she sees Claire. I think they see something in each other. She sees maybe herself, you know, a few years back when she was starting out, and you get to see her sort of, she opens up to her, I suppose, because Claire is the new kid on the block, and she's a little bit more seemingly vulnerable, I think, in Hannah's eyes at least. So yeah, that was really nice. We even sort of, we lived in the same neighborhood in LA when we were shooting, which was nice. So sometimes we'd carpool into work, and, you know, we were able to build that vibe. And, you know, I mean, it made it all the more heartbreaking when when her character is the one to discover Hannah at the end of the show, and you know, all those nuances. But again, when you have a friend and a colleague like that, I think we were able to sort of decompress after those really heavy scenes. And you know, it's so nice to have that kind of vibe with your actor friends, because you don't always get it in LA, just because of how things are here, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask you a little bit about working with Michelle Maclaren, who was the director on the Vegas episode where we see that flashback moment, and just how her and the rest of the creative team really worked to create the right space and the right environment for you and Steve to navigate that scene, because there are so many different directions that scene could have gone in, and it's so beautifully constructed in the way that it tells the story. And so I was curious how, you know, Michelle in particular was like a really great conduit to that all coming together.
Well, Michelle was really fantastic. I absolutely loved working with her. And I think, you know, the fact that she came in to do that episode, which was so unlike any other episode of the show previously, you know, she's such a great actor's director. She really was really concerned with, you know, certainly for Hannah, the inner thought processes, you know, that she's going through there. And yeah, it was wonderful to work with her. I mean, in terms of those specific scenes, you know, in terms of the sexual assault scenes in Vegas, we also worked with an intimacy coordinator, which is something I've never, you know, done before. I mean, I don't think the role of intimacy coordinator has existed that long, but that was also, you know, great to have that sort of conversation and sounding board more about the choreography, the technical side of how those scenes were going to be shot, and make sure that everybody was comfortable in the shooting of those. And there really was such a sensitivity to that. And I think, you know, Steve Carell, our producers, everybody was very aware that this, you know, was a scene and an episode that we really had to get right. And, you know, again, it was really more about the thought process for Hannah. So rather than being about nudity or being about a physicality, that was obviously a part of it. But I think Michelle was also very keen to make sure that, you know, we could see what was going on in Hannah's mind and physically and emotionally. So so she was very much also, you know, always encouraging me to sort of go through the thought processes of the fight or flight, the freeze elements, the sort of psychological journey that she's going on in those moments. So, you know, it was a combination between the physical and the emotional, but definitely I think the emotional being more important in terms of the storytelling.
Yeah, and I know that, you know, since the show came out and since it aired and in the following months, you've had a lot of women reach out to you directly using social media and in other ways and talk about how, you know, showing that space where someone does just freeze, which isn't usually represented and people don't always understand, was really important. And even just the representation of this character in the story throughout was really important. And I was curious if that's made you start to think differently about the types of roles that you think about taking on. I mean, you've always taken such fascinating roles that really have distinct voices and add to conversation anyway, but has this kind of added another layer to that for you?
Yeah, I think It's interesting because I think particularly this issue has been so charged in our culture now. And, I mean, I always look for roles that are complex. And I think that I really appreciated the grey area and the complexity that the show was trying to achieve in terms of not judging these characters. I think it's, culturally, it's very easy for people to kind of go black and white, or, villainous predator and, innocent victim. And actually, I think as in life, it's always much more complex than that. And yeah, that for me is always, complex characters are always more interesting to play, especially if you're doing a series and you have the time to, over episodes to really plot your arc and your character's journey. I always try and go for the complex roles, and it depends, obviously whatever comes my way. Some things are more overtly about our culture, something like the morning show, but Misbehavior, the film that I did, also is a period piece, and there's but the actual messaging is similar, so yeah, there's sort of many different ways to approach it, but I'm definitely more drawn, when possible, to things that have resonances in our culture.
Yeah. And within that conscious selection of these really complex roles that have resonance, have you found that kind of you've had to make a conscious decision and turn down certain projects that just didn't feel like they were the right fit? And kind of how have you navigated just that journey from a career perspective? Because obviously you're always balancing trying to take roles that feel like they really speak to you, but also at a certain point in your career, you need work and you need to get hired, and you want to work with people to get that next job in the way as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a journey. I think, when I first left drama school, I was, like most actors, just happy to be working and, mostly doing theatre, and I wasn't thinking too heavily about the themes of the work. I think that, you've got to put in your 10,000 hours or whatever it is, in terms of to have the luxury to make those choices. And it depends where you're coming from. Some people come, out of the gate and get opportunities that are, very sort of zeitgeisty and very, big moments. But for me, it was sort of a bit more of a marathon than a sprint, which I always appreciated because, you get the chance to flex different muscles and, hone your craft. But yeah, I mean, I think certainly since doing Belle, which I did in 2013, which, was my first lead role, in a film, and the conversations around that, around race, around gender, around class, in the UK in that period, was so interesting to me, when we do Q&As after the film, and there was just so much to talk about, and it just opened up a different side of storytelling to me at that time. And and since then I've obviously had more opportunities, so yeah, I'm selective, and obviously sometimes escapism is great too, and sometimes you want to do something that's joyful, or and that's also anything that makes you feel. I think for me, I look at, when I read a script, if it moves me, and it can move me, not just to tears, but to any kind of emotion. I think if it moves me, then I want to do it. And if it's, if it leaves me feeling like with a bitter taste in my mouth, or just feeling apathetic or whatever, I think, well, this is probably not for me. So yeah, I think it's, and it's a case by case, script by script, moment by moment process, I think, but ultimately, you sort of have to go with your instincts at the end of the day.
But if you're not reading the script out loud.
Yes, exactly.
In terms of kind of always looking for each role that you take on to be something that challenges you and stretches you in a new way, what are the ways in the looking back reflectively you really feel like playing the character of Hannah in the morning show did that for you?
Well, it was the first time I'd done an episodic series for a long time, nearly 10 years, I think. And it was just wonderful, I think, to work in such a great ensemble as well. I think coming from theatre, incredible actors, Billy Crudup, Mark Duplass, just incredible actors. That was really a great experience. And also, I think working on something that's in a new streaming service for Apple TV Plus was, you know, an interesting journey. And, you know, obviously that doesn't affect the day-to-day work, but I think it affects how people consume, you know, obviously what you do. So, so yeah, I mean, I've loved working on the morning show, and I think I'm really proud of the conversations that it's generated, and you know, just being part of that incredible cast.
Yeah, separately over the last few weeks, I know that you've been posting a lot about kind of your rediscovery of art and painting, and interested in kind of, as we've been navigating everything with quarantine over the last few weeks, how that's been a really therapeutic element for you personally.
Yeah, it absolutely has. And I think, you know, it's funny, I think when you're an artist, and I don't, you know, however, I use that as the umbrella term of an artist of all, you know, any medium. But, you know, I think you do need to process these things in our world. And there's just been so much to process lately. And I think, you know, being confined at home as you know, as much as that's been a journey and frustrating and shocking and jolting, you know, it's also been a chance for me to slow down and to reconnect with things that I probably haven't had time, to be quite honest, to do, you know, in the last few years, because I've been, you know, being other people quite a lot of the time. So painting is something I always loved, you know, when I was a teenager, and considered doing it instead of acting actually at one point. But because, you know, acting was seemed more collaborative and fun, you know, with other people, I chose acting. But it's been nice to kind of still have an artistic expression available to me, even in isolation, lockdown, curfew, all the things that we've been going through. So yeah, and it's almost like a meditation for me. You know, I think so often when you are acting, it's different on stage, but, you know, in film and TV, there's so many technical elements to it that can, you know, it's rare, you know, to get a sense of flow. I mean, artistic flow, you know, in certain scenes, certainly, you know, in that, like I was saying about that scene we were talking about in episode 10 with Reese, and, you know, at the end of the series, I definitely got a sense of flow in that, because it was such an epic scene. But I think that idea of, you know, losing track of time, being so absorbed in something, being in the present, I get that from painting. And I think, you know, it's so easy to be anxious at this time about the past, about the future, about the state of the world, you know, that anything that helps you be in the present moment is very soothing. And it's nice. It's also nice it's something I can control. You know, it's nice to be able to feel like at the end of the day, I achieved something, I made something, I expressed something, which, you know, sometimes in quarantine and in lockdown has, you know, it's hard to feel, you know, that you're moving forward in your creativity. So it's been great for me.
Yeah. I love that
career. I'm going to switch careers now. This is it. Painting only.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.